Chromelodeon.
Chromelodeon.
What's that?
So, okay. So this word Chromelodeon came to me before I knew its two existing versions in music. That is, for me, Chromelodeon is chroma, which is color, which is chromaticism, melodia, which is melody or line, and then I had to look up the eon part, which is like something that, like a machine, like something that does that, something that makes that happen. So it makes color and melody and chromaticism happen. And then I discovered that Harry Parch created an instrument, a 32 note per octave microtonal instrument called the Chromelodeon. And that almost tempted me to write more microtonal stuff into the piece, but I decided no, he does it best. And there was also a rock band in the kind of an indie at the time rock band in the '60s, a kind of cult rock band called Chromelodeon.
Oh, I could see
I did that research.
Rock band.
So I had this name. I wasn't sure how it was going to fit, but when I got to the end of this piece, I thought, I can't just call it Symphony No. 4. That's so dull. And there's a relationship between this new symphony and my older piece, Color Wheel. And I knew that I wanted them to have some relationship, so it's there in the music, but in this word Chromelodeon, I just have a particularly a strong relationship to color, both visual color and sonic color. So it just seemed like a question, when listeners would see that word, they'd want to know more.
Yeah. And I was intrigued when you explained it, that because chromo means color, but it's also chromatic.
Yeah, which means color, multicolor.
In music, but chromatic, we don't, we think of color, we think of bright C major and stuff like that.
Right.
But the chromatic and the color together implies a certain kind of intensity, a certain kind of intensity of using chromaticism in a colorful and intense way, which I think that's helped me wrap my head around it.
Yep. Well, it's exciting and terrifying, and it's very different to hear a piece in the middle of the rehearsal process, because usually I show up and I don't listen to what the orchestra's doing. I'm just around to make sure there aren't disasters in the parts at first rehearsals. And so this was a case where it for me to stay at home, looking for emails from Hugh every hour or whatever, and just let it develop. And to come in a very well-shaped form was great, but that means that all the anticipation is built up over the last 2 weeks.
And we know each other well.
Yeah.
So we've had 5 rehearsals before you ever came.
Right.
And that's nerve-wracking for me, because I'm thinking if we're not on the right path, and Aaron Kernis shows up and we have to rejigger the whole piece, we're in trouble. So there was a lot of email back and forth and questions, what do you want to hear here? Is this more important than that? The musical hierarchy I was asking, and checking details in the parts, and players would come up to me at the first, second, and third rehearsals, is this correct? And I would email you, and we'd get back. So the process of developing the piece so it was ready for you, and of course the orchestra knew you were coming. At first they thought you were coming on Monday. That was probably a good thing, because then there was like, oh, he's not here yet. But we had already rehearsed 3 times, and they thought you might be there Monday, and then no, you're coming Friday. So it really gave us the chance to get to a point where we were nervous, but we felt, I think, really ready for you to present it to your ears and not waste your time with lots of wrong notes or questions, fundamental questions.
Right, and so we could immediately deal with phrasing and balance and all those things.
The sound and the picture of the piece was there, ready to be talked about.
Right.
Yeah, super exciting.
That's great. Well, there was a very significant part of the thought process was thinking towards students. And actually, I don't mean in the way of changing the level of, the challenging level of music. Last year I wrote a piece for Matt Heimovitz and my son Jonah, who's a young cellist. And before I wrote the piece, I said to Matt, well, should I bring the level down at all? How should I deal with this? He said, absolutely not. Make it a challenge that he can work toward, that can build over time. I was very much thinking the same way here. I'm not going to, this is for professionals, for young professionals. And in fact, they're extremely adept already at things that a lot of older professionals are, going to have to catch up to do. So it was more that aspect already. The final movement, I was thinking of some more kind of upbeat thing, but in fact,
yeah.
celebratory, but it's always being interrupted by dark stuff, It's and actually a lot of the piece is about interruption. It's about starting something and starting a mood, and then having something else come in and color it or darken it or something like that. So a lot of these things were going on at the same time.
And Aaron and I go way back. So when I was thinking about what the school should do to celebrate 150 years, the first thing I thought about was we need to create new art. And at the first rehearsal to the orchestra, I said the most important thing, we're an orchestra, we recreate music that's written hundreds of years ago, we do it all the time, but the most important thing you can do as a young musician is be involved in the creation of new art. And we tend to forget that because it's a very recreative job we do here and we teach here. And I said, that's what we're doing. This is not something schools do very often. It's not something the school has done very much in the past. And we go back 30 years, maybe?
90 or so,
Yeah, close to 30 years and lots of performances and lots of collaborations.
Lots of working together and
kind of understanding each other. And as Aaron said, the level of students today is so high. The technical challenges I was much more worried about, and the quality of the young players performing made me think, wow, they really can do the kind of thing that back when I was a student, people would have said, that's unplayable. And I'm sure Richard Strauss dealt with that, Wagner dealt with that, Stravinsky dealt with that, and it's always, oh, that's unplayable. But then a young generation comes along and it's like, oh my goodness, their ability to absorb complex music quickly in a quasi-professional situation, just a few rehearsals, getting ready for a public performance has been really, for me, very rewarding, very exciting. And all my worries about how challenging the piece are gradually dissipating. We're almost there.
Yeah. And it's also, it means a lot to create a piece for a really important, vital music school, both for the reasons of enriching the repertoire, of making the students feel that they're part of an ongoing history and not just the recreation of the past, and then to have the collaborative aspect of a living composer being there, talking to them, and sharing that energy.
I'm glad that you said that because I had this, of course it's the first rehearsal where you're there and everybody's like, wow, oh my gosh, the composer. But the feeling as soon as you got up on stage and started talking, where I think a lot of their questions of what does this music mean, or even though it was just technical things we were saying, things came into focus right away. They were absolutely aware now that they were in the presence of someone that could hear everything that was going on and knew exactly what he wanted. And you would say just a few little things and everything changed and things that had been very confusing came into focus beautifully. And I felt a very kind of exciting energy between the students and you, and that most of them never met you before, and that there's something happens right away when everybody's attention level is up, their antennae are vibrating, and something special happened where we got much better really quickly with just a few words said.
Because of our relationship, I know that I don't have to, in a very deferential way, go and give you notes and say, would you, and expect that I know I can walk comfortably onto the stage and speak to the orchestra and be part of a three-part
I think they
dialogue.
sensed that too. They could see that we know each other well, and I think that puts them at ease. It's not like, oh, there's some kind of two maestros here. It was very that relaxation and kind of mutually aware of what the other is thinking and wanting was really helpful.
I was very conscious in this piece of multi-sensory thinking. Many of the choices that I made happened in very surprising ways. The use of a variation of a Handel tune in the second movement came unexpectedly. It was not originally part of the plan of the piece. And that Handel tune is something that once it gets into your ear and once it gets into your body, it's like you can't forget it.
Yeah, it's very special.
And in a way, maybe that special quality had me writing a variation first on it that seemed like my tune, seemed like my Handel tune, and only leaving the real tune for its distorted version at the very end. So I was definitely thinking big 19th century orchestra, big Müllerian orchestra, and there are orchestrational moments in the piece that harken very much back to Mahler.
To Strauss and Mahler, yeah, I think so, yeah.
And plus especially in the last movement, the kind of the episodic quality of the structure of you're somewhere and then you're immediately somewhere else, just quick cuts.
Like film cuts.
Yeah.
Yeah, the scene changes. Yeah,
and that happens a little bit in the rest of the piece, but it's more a little smoother in general. So anyway, there are elements of a kind of 19th century intense playing, intense thinking of the tutti.
The grand virtuoso orchestra.
Right, and of the kind of the lightness of, as you're using very much of the example of
French transparent stuff when there's a lot going on and something has to be really clear and the underneath has to not disturb so much. Yeah.
And then the looking much further back.
So the Baroque.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it encompasses 3 centuries at least. Yeah.
And the program too. I mean, the program with Debussy and the Bernstein is really both reflective of the late 19th century and Bernstein the 20th century and now.
Yeah.
21st.
I mean, I was quite conscious of wanting a certain kind of balance of style and color and sound, and I think it's worked out really well.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that the Bernstein is very transparent with just strings and violin and percussion. It's a much smaller orchestra. And then the Debussy goes back to the big orchestra, and it's the oldest piece on the program.
Right.
And there's a kind of special, I'm not sure the public is very aware of, there is a Bernstein-NEC connection that people don't realize. Everybody thinks Bernstein was the quintessential New Yorker.
Right.
He grew up in Boston.
Yes.
And he lived in Boston, and then he lived in Newton, and he went to Boston Latin High School, and he went to Harvard, and then he went to Curtis, and then he came back to Boston and actually set up a studio right across the street in 295 Huntington Avenue and taught piano and took piano lessons when he was 13 years old in this building in Jordan Hall and gave his first recital in Williams Hall when he was 14 years old. And so we claim a certain kind of kinship. Right. And we thought, given the centenary of his birth, the Serenade for me is one of my favorite pieces of his and not so often played. And this spectacular young artist diploma student, Imo Yang, who wanted to play it. I was surprised. I thought when I suggested it, he would say, "What's that?" But he said, "Oh, I've always wanted to play
Great.
that." So it works as a kind of, I think the 3 pieces together work really well.
Yeah.
Well, as a performer, I'm not a composer. I'm so excited to grab onto new cutting-edge art and put it out there for everybody. And I really hope that we do more of it. I think it's important. As I was saying earlier, recreating is one thing, but if there's going to be a future, it's not just going to be recreating. It's creating, collaborating, doing new things, new boundaries, new edges. And that's what this is.
Definitely. And I see all the time with younger students that they are not only adept technically, not only willing to take on new challenges of how they approach their instrument, how they approach music, but also they're very much able to mix and adjust their playing style to music that has different requirements, to different styles, to different genres, and it enables them to transition very quite smoothly and almost effortlessly to other kinds of music and think of music not as a series of kind of compartments, but as a broad and just totally enriching in every possible kind of genre way of life, actually, and way of living.
I agree with you 100%. I think that today's students are way more open. I mean, they're not judgmental. They're open to, any music can go in any direction, can be completely new to them, and they think, okay, let's try that. And I have that sense over these weeks. That anything challenging, that's not, they're not going to judge it. They're not going to say this doesn't work. They're going to say, oh, okay, how do we make this happen? And I think that aspect of the students here and the students around the world, as you say, not saying, well, that's just not the way music should be, or that's not how it should sound, or I don't understand this. There's just none of that. There's this openness to anything is possible.
One of the nice things I noticed, I hadn't known about this until recently, some of the other commissions for the 150th are in different genres, and that's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, we pride ourselves on having, contemporary improvisation and jazz and chorus and opera, and everything is possible here.
Right. That's really wonderful and meaningful, and something to see continued around the country.
Right, to kind of cherish and nurture. Yeah. I think art is supposed to confront you a little bit. It's not supposed to be always consoling or always, it's supposed to confront some of the uncomfortable aspects of society and human nature and
I mean, music is so multifaceted that it has the ability to work on many different levels. Both, if you want a comfort food experience, you can find that. If you want, it's not only if you want challenge, but music does challenge, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about Beethoven or Mahler or Shostakovich or Bartók, I mean, you're thinking about people who had a message, people that were wanting to confront things, both artistically and aesthetically, but I think, inside our spirits and inside our culture.
And we are of our time. We can't really do anything about that. It just is a fact. And also we are of our own era, but in smaller segments of time, how history affects us, how the world affects us as artists, as creators. That's just something that changes with time unless you make a strong effort to only play nice music so people come in and are comforted all the time.
Or if you shut yourself off from society.
Right.
But yeah, we're right in there in society trying to have an impact.
I've spoken to a bunch of composers who had very similar reactions of, last November just shutting down for a while and not knowing how to go on for a while, and I had my own version of that, and but that was before this piece, and it was always an interesting kind of test to see, well, how am I feeling? Because it's with the 24/7 news cycle, the feeling of anxiety is being ratcheted up all the time.
Yeah.
Making new work can't work on that momentary, kind of cycle. It's in much longer phrases and much longer stretches, and yet the feeling of a time can't help but make its way.
I mean, I think we feel that in Mozart and Beethoven too.
That's true. Yes.
Their lives might have been miserable, and they were writing something sublimely relaxed and beautiful and joyous, and that didn't in any way negate the complexity of their lives. Right. Yeah.
By the end of this concert, I hope the audience will feel like they've taken part in a really big and rich meal, and one that's left them satisfied and complete.
Yeah. I think it will be. I mean, certainly to do the world premiere first was a choice I think I had to make just because of the lengths of the pieces and how the performance is going to work. But it's actually the biggest piece in a way. It's the Bernstein's slightly longer, but your piece is by far the big piece on the program. And so, to be transported into that whole world right away, transported into that whole audience, and I think kind of exciting. And then the young artist and the Debussy, I think they're getting their money's worth, and they're getting something unlike they're going to hear in virtually any other concert. So we wanted this to make a splash.
I think it will.